And you're on mute, Allison.
Sorry, I thought you said you were unmuting me. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm assuming most people are somewhere in Ontario, but if you are not, I guess it's probably earlier morning even. So good morning covers everyone. My name is Allison McLean. I'm the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer at CLO since about end of August last year. My background is in research, but also DEI, anti-racism, and anti-oppression work. And I am joining everyone from the unceded traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Huron-Wendat. There's a really awesome website that is on the slide right here. It's nativeland.ca. So for anyone who is new to land acknowledgements, you can go on that website. You can type in your city, you can type in your postal code, and it'll let you know which lands you are on. It'll also let you know the treaties covered on the lands that you are on. And this is just a small way that we can acknowledge every day, whether it's in whenever we have get-togethers, which I know right now are mostly on Zoom, but it's just a small way we can start learning about the people whose lands we're on, but also the treaties that existed and have been violated for a very long time. And it's also a way of constantly acknowledging the colonial past and present that is in Canada. So this map that you see on the screen is a really great map that was created by the Indigenous Peoples Atlas of Canada. So on this map, it shows the lands based on the treaties, but also based on who exists on this land and who has traditionally been the stewards of these lands. So you'll notice that it won't have Ontario and Hamilton and the different cities that we would be familiar with, but these are the lands and the cities and the ways in which Indigenous people identified, and some still identify these lands. So it's a really cool project. It's sort of an exhibit that is going across Canada. They put it on the floor and you can walk around and familiarize yourself with the different nations and the different treaties. So I would encourage everyone to sort of check it out, but also check out nativeland.ca so you can know whose lands you're on and also learn a little bit more about land acknowledgements. So I just wanted to set intention for the space because I think it's always a good thing to do, especially I'm new to the COP, I'm a new face for everyone, and I'm sure there's also other new people as we learned. So for today, the acronym is RESPECT. So we will respect differences. We don't all have to agree with each other, but we can be kind to each other. We expect mistakes. So during the discussions, when we have the breakout sessions, we will all make mistakes, especially with language, because language is something that is fluid, it's always changing. So as long as we are open to feedback, if we do use harmful language, I think there's definitely the expectation of mistakes. This is a safe and non-judgmental zone. So please feel free to ask questions as respectfully as you can, but this is a learning environment, and the only way we can learn is if we feel safe and free from judgment to ask questions that we have. And we would hope that everyone can participate to the best of their ability. So if you need to turn off your video because of, being over Zoom at this point, that's great. If you want to type in the chat, that's great. If you need captions or anything, that is an option on Zoom. So all of these things are great. We want to also evaluate our learning. So as we go through the session, just think about where you started and where you're going, but also other areas in which, so take down, notes of certain topics or things that you might want to go back to. So for example, nativeland.ca would be a good one for those who are not familiar yet with land acknowledgements. We also want to challenge our thinking and our comfort zone. So it's easy and it's comfortable to stay where we are, right? And not move forward or be open to acquiring new knowledge or learning new ideas or being open to realizing that maybe we were wrong about something and that we didn't have the whole picture or that we didn't know all the sides. So I think just challenging our thinking and moving the comfort zone a little bit is important today. And also just trusting the process. We're not going to have closure today because a lot of things that we will touch on have been happening for so long. So there's no way that in one short session, we can fix everything and make everyone feel great and up to date. This is a process. So this is just the beginning or the continuation of the process for a lot of us. And it is going to be a lifetime of work for all of us because we can always improve and learn more as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion concepts. Next slide, please. And I will just type in the website in the chat in case anybody missed it. All right, there we go. So this is a quote that I really love because I think it shows the intention for today in a great way. So this is James Baldwin, an author, playwright, many things, activist. And one of his sayings was, we can disagree and still love each other unless your disagreement is rooted in my oppression and denial of my humanity and right to exist. So this is the mood and the vibe we're setting today. We can all disagree, that's fine, but I think we can challenge our thinking and also just sort of, sit with some of our maybe beliefs or unconscious bias that leads us to, stay rooted in the oppression and the denial of the humanity of others, because that does happen sometimes because of, the fact that we live in society that is, colonial, has a colonial past and present. So that is an racist past and present, and an oppressive past and present, and a capitalist past and present. So all of these things will show up in many ways, in the ways we are taught in school, but also the ways that we are socialized, and a lot of the conditioning that happens in every, facet of our lives. So I think this is a good quote to think about, reflect on, and carry with us during this session, but also in general. I think it's a nice way to sort of understand or evaluate some of your pushback when it comes to, anti-racism or anti-oppression. Is it rooted in the continued oppression of other people and the continued harm on other people? Next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, we want to be out of the comfort zone because we don't learn when we're in the comfort zone. So we want to be in the learning edges or in the blue circle, which is next steps, right? Which is movement, which is action and doing things. Next slide, please. And another thing that I would urge everyone to sort of do privately, but you're, always welcome to share in the chat, is tracking your discomfort. So as we talk about different topics today, as we do different activities today, just rate your comfort level. So 1 would be low and 5 would be high. And just, think about some of the reasons why you might be feeling super comfortable with something, or some of the reasons why you're feeling uncomfortable with something. So it's just a self-assessment for yourself. Next slide, please. So before we get started, I just always love to share some language that we use a lot in DEI work, just because you never know if everyone has the same definitions for the words, but also some of this might be new to some people. So it's always good to set sort of a baseline of shared language. So microaggressions are indirect, subtle, or unintentional statements, actions. They're incidents that are regarded as discrimination against members of a group that is marginalized, So think racialized folks or people with disabilities. So an example of this would be someone saying, oh, wow, your English is so good, to someone who is not white, basically, most of the time, or someone who is an immigrant, you know. That's a microaggression, because why would your assumption be that their English wouldn't be good, right? What is your thinking about what someone whose English is good looks like? So microaggressions come from people having stereotypes and unconscious bias, right? So they'll say things sometimes that someone might think that's a compliment, but it's really not a compliment, right? Another example is if you ask a female doctor, nurse, can I see the doctor, please? Or sometimes if you're calling a female doctor hun or sweetie when you don't know them, right? Those are microaggressions. And tokenism. So that's the policy or practice of only making a symbolic effort to give the semblance of equality or equity. So this would be hiring someone who is a person of color, for example, so that it looks like your organization is inclusive and your organization has diverse people, you know, working there and things like that. So you're only doing it to prevent criticism or to seem, you know, progressive or diverse or something like that, or to make it seem that people have equal access to job opportunity in your workplace, but that's not what's actually happening. A lot of times with tokenism, the person who is hired in this scenario would be treated poorly, would still experience, you know, racism, discrimination, you know, it really depends on, you know, the person they are, but they would experience discrimination at your organization, even though they are the person who is trying to symbolize to everyone else that you are not an organization that discriminates based on religion or whatever, you know, it is. Gaslighting, so that's when you make someone question their own reality. So an example of that would be someone shared with you that they had a distressing interaction with a coworker, with a manager, with someone, and you know, maybe a racial slur was used or something homophobic was said. And then instead of you saying, oh my goodness, that is horrible, how can I support you, you know, to in this situation, what would you like me to do to help support you? Can we report the person together? Can I, you know, support you in any other way? Instead, you say, oh no, I know Henry who made that statement. He didn't mean it like that. Henry's such a great person. I've known Henry for many years, and Henry is not racist or sexist or homophobic. Are you sure that's what he said? He probably didn't mean it like that. So that's gaslighting. When someone knows and tells you what happened to them, and you tell them that, no, 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 that did not happen. That was not racism. That was not sexism. That was not homophobic. That was not inappropriate what happened to you. You're overreacting, essentially, is what you're saying. So that's gaslighting. Virtue signaling is the act of publicly expressing opinions in order to demonstrate that you're a good person or a good organization. So for example, a lot of organizations over the past couple of years have been posting hashtag Black Lives Matter, you know, hashtag pay equity, hashtag, so many hashtags, especially on social media, but also on their websites, right? People are posting, we are outraged at X, insert, you know, whatever thing. We're outraged at the recovery of bodies at former residential schools, right? But that's where it ends. There's nothing being done to support, you know, Indigenous people or donate, you know, to funds that are supporting survivors of residential schools. There's nothing being done to help Black folks if, let's say, you're posting hashtag Black Lives Matter all the time. So it's just basically making actions, but not backing them, right? So posting things, saying things, but there's nothing deep beyond that. There's no commitment on your part to helping in any way. That's virtue signaling. So I hope everyone can tell that these are all not good things to do. We want everything that we do in life in general, in our personal lives, but also in our work lives, to be meaningful, right? To result in meaningful change, and less oppression, less racism, less sexism, less homophobia, and all of these things in the workplace. Next slide, please. So some things that we can also reflect on, which is sort of a continuation of the shared language, would be unconscious bias, which I've already used a lot of times. So this is behaviors or judgments that are conditioned and reinforced over time from an accumulation of personal experiences below the level of conscious awareness, intention, or control. So unconscious bias is not just things that you have personally experienced or people around you have experienced. So unconscious bias can also happen from what we view on TV. So for example, all the ads on TV that show, African countries as being poor, desolate, the children are starving, and, these flies flying around the hungry children, and they'll land on the child's mouth and the child can't even swat it away. So all of these images of Africa as this desolate place that doesn't have anything good. What's that going to do if that's all you're seeing all the time, about Africa, and you've never been there? Maybe you don't know people from there. And if you do know people, maybe you don't know them very well, so they don't share, about the wonderful things there, the technological advances, the, science advances. I mean, look at South Africa. They were the first to describe Omicron, but because of unconscious bias, the media reported it as, oh, Omicron was discovered in South Africa, and we all interpreted it, but also they, purposely phrased it in a way that would prey on our unconscious bias that, oh, another variant came out of there, when that's not what had happened, right? So unconscious bias is something that happens on purpose, based on propaganda, so to speak, but also just based on the reinforcing of the, systemic oppression and racism and all of these things that occur in our society in general. So generalizations, so it's those statements that are sometimes true, not always. So they're possibilities, they're not certainties, they're not true of every individual in a group. So for example, people might think, oh, Black people can dance, all Black people can dance. And sure, some Black people can dance, some can't dance, right? So there's all the, and again, a lot of where we see some of these things will be TV, right? The movies that we watch, the TV shows that we watch, a lot of that is reinforced. Black people are athletic. So when I was in high school, I was approached for every sports team, even basketball, and I'm 5'2", right? But it's because there was the unconscious bias or the generalization that all Black people are good at sports, right? So even though you're 5'2", you're Black, so that trumps the fact that you're not very tall. So chances are you can still play. So possibilities, not certainties. And then stereotypes, again, similar vein. They are set ideas that label all people in the group as the same, and they shut off any chance of understanding. So I think stereotypes and generalizations are super similar, right? In that, again, sometimes stereotypes are true, but a lot of times they're not, right? But the thing is, as humans, when it comes to stereotypes, for example, if you think all Black people are athletic, and you meet 10 Black people and 8 are not, but 2 are, your brain has a tendency to hyper, focus on the 2 that are, to cement that stereotype. So a lot of times we sort of, our brain is constantly filtering what information is useful, what information is not. So a lot of these ideas are cemented, in our minds based on unconscious bias, but also the fact that when it comes to stereotypes, if something you think is true, when you meet people who don't fit that stereotype, you're just like, oh, those are outliers, not realizing that, oh, wow, majority of who I've met, how can they be outliers, right? And question the stereotype, a lot of us will just be like, oh no, outlier, outlier, outlier. Then when you meet someone who does fit the stereotype, you're like, aha, I knew it. You see? So that's why I say with DI, you want to constantly evaluate that. Maybe I don't have all the information. Maybe I don't have the full picture. Next slide, please. And so why do we do, DI work? Why do we talk about allyship, which is, sort of the topic we're approaching today a little bit? It's because power and privilege exist. So whether you subscribe to it or not, it exists. So at the middle of the wheel is power. So all identities, all ways of identifying oneself that are in the middle of the circle are ways in which people are closer to power and are experiencing power in their everyday lives. So if you're a citizen, you're experiencing power. You're not worried about being kicked out of the country because of maybe committing a crime, for example, or for protesting, for example, or doing anything that might be seen as potentially jeopardizing, your immigration status. If you're white, you have power. If you have a formal education, university, college level, you have power. If you're able-bodied, if you're heterosexual, neurotypical, if you're slim, you own property, you're rich, you speak English. So there's a lot of ways in which we have power in different ways. And then the middle circle is you're close to power. So you don't fully have, the power, but you have more power than the people at the margins of the circle. So you're middle class, you're average build, you're a gay man, for example, you have some disability, but maybe it's something that is not highly visual, highly visible, sorry. You have a high school education, you are documented, right? You're a landed status, you're a permanent resident, something like that. So these are all situations in which, we have power, some power, maybe not the most power in situations, but you have some power. And then at the margins are people who are undocumented, people who are dark in complexion, right? People who only have an elementary education, or no education at all. People who are non-English, right? People who are poor, people who are housing unstable, all these different things. And I want to also say, within all of this, there's extra layers, right? There's nuance. So for example, with skin color, I think everyone can tell I'm Black, right? So obviously, for the skin color one, I would be, in the marginalized, like at the margins. However, within, Blackness as well, I am not the lightest skinned, but I am lighter skinned, right, than some Black people. So even within, each category, they are extra levels, right? So someone who is darker skinned than me will experience more, oppression than I will, and I will experience more power and privilege in situations than them. So I think it's constantly evaluating because everything is nuanced and goes deeper and deeper, right? It's not just, it's not so simple, right? There's many factors. So in different situations, you can have power and privilege versus in other situations, you don't have power and privilege, right? So it's always constantly assessing in the situations that you're in, am I being oppressive to other folks present? How am I using my power or my privilege to pass the mic to other people? Because allyship is not, speaking for other people, it's creating opportunities or opening opportunities for other people to speak. So say I was invited to talk about, something, but in that situation, the fact alone that I was invited to speak about something means I have power and privilege in that situation. What I could do is say, you know what, thank you for thinking of me, but, I think this person, who is more marginalized would be a better speaker than me on this topic. So things like that are how we use our power and privilege for good and to be good allies. Next slide, please. So what is power and privilege? So power is the ability to direct and influence behavior, events, and allocation of resources. And privilege, it's a form of societal power. Specifically, it's a form of power that is not earned, right? It's derived from sex, race, gender, ability, socioeconomic standing, things like that. It's an advantage enjoyed by some people, and people in positions of power and privilege are often unaware of their advantage and how it might be oppressive to others. And so constantly trying to balance power and inequities in relationships, especially, at work, is how we can be better allies, but it's also how we create meaningful change. Next slide, please. So allyship, it's a continuum, right? So we all start off maybe not understanding the issues, but then you continue, as you go on the journey, you learn more, you become more aware of what's going on. You start recognizing microaggressions or people using stereotypes or people using harmful language. And then the next step would be you start acting, right? So silence is being complicit. When you don't say something, when someone says something racist, that's you sort of co-signing and saying, that's okay. I don't see anything wrong with someone saying that, right? So as allies, we want to act. We want to be active. So if you're learning about things and starting to recognize things, the next step would be, actioning that and, speaking out and saying, hey, I don't think that was an appropriate thing to use. I don't think that was respectful language. I think what you said is actually racist, and this is why. And then just sort of, talking to people and being active in some way, right? Showing action. And then the next step would be advocacy of some sort, right? So leading, efforts in a more tangible and big way. Next slide, please. So what we do not want is performative allyship, right? So that's when a person or an organization expresses the intention of allyship and solidarity, but they don't back that with any action. There's no follow through. So the organization or the person, they want credit for their intent rather than their impact, right? So posting a picture like this, for example, on your website where there's Black hands in the picture, so people will think, oh, wow, there's Black people in your organization, it's diverse. But then when I show up on my first day, it's like, oh, wow, everyone's white, right? So that's performative allyship. And it's also virtue signaling, right? In a way, which is one of the terms we went through earlier. Next slide, please. So what do we want to do? We want to disrupt. So we want to do this at all stages and in many ways. So these are some of the ways in which we have been disrupting at CLO. So there's a staff orientation committee to review training and onboarding materials for new and existing staff. So we're finding new and exciting ways to help with the onboarding process, but also to provide resources for people in a way that is more accessible. So we're providing TikToks, YouTube videos, TEDx talks, podcasts, so people can use all this information that already exists in new and exciting ways that everyone individually can relate to. So for people who want to read books, we have book lists, we have all types of resources so people can learn, about all of these concepts, especially as allies to folks with intellectual disabilities, right? We want to be as informed about intersectionality and other ways in which ways that they identify can affect how they receive services or how they are perceived and how they interact with folks in the world. The CLO promotions policy was drafted again and shared, and people were invited to give feedback and ask questions so everyone can understand, and so that it's made as equitable as we can make it. So for example, education is not going to be the only requirement. People can also have experience, and then they can receive training in specific things education-wise that they would need to know. I was hired which has been, a good thing in terms of increasing some of this day-to-day work. We are having ongoing anti-oppression, anti-racism, and equity education discussion sessions for staff and board members through lunch and learns every month. We have started doing land acknowledgement. So we have a policy now for our email signature, but also for all meetings that we have. And we're taking it beyond that because we are also doing learning and providing resources for people about different issues that are going on that Indigenous communities are facing. For example, the lack of access to clean water still in 2022 for several Indigenous communities. We're also learning how we can be good allies to Indigenous folks through different things. We have a calendar now where we celebrate and share resources or acknowledge different holidays. So Eid, Holi, we celebrate, so everything, right? So because everyone has different cultures, so we're trying to be more inclusive through the holidays that we celebrate, not being so, Eurocentric and Christocentric and things like that. We also did a survey to do an assessment of how the work environment was for people and asked about things that they're experiencing in the workplace and anything like that, so that we can bring about change and create an implementation plan that has specific, and very direct feedback from everyone. And so these are just some of the ways. There are many other ways in which we are actioning things and being intentional about creating meaningful change. But, my time is up. So the last slide is just a reminder to track your discomfort. So as we go into the breakout sessions and different topics come up, you can still keep a track around, which topics am I super comfortable with? Why is that? Which topics was I very uncomfortable with? Why is that? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Allison. We really appreciate the work you put into your slides and your discussion today. Before we go into our breakout group,